What are we going to talk about? Oh, I guess we'll just find out. We'll
Yeah.
find out. Do it on the fly.
I've got vague and random confusing questions for you. So.
Okay.
Perfect timing.
I just wanted to ask what your creative process is. So how do you get up in the morning and how does something come to you? Does it, how does the inspiration come?
Well, maybe I can give you an example of the novel Here Come the Dogs, which was essentially about a bushfire. I wanted to write a bushfire novel because I felt like I hadn't really seen that many of them in the Australian literary canon. Maybe I'm just not well read enough, but I wanted to combine, I want to use that as the central image or metaphor for race relations, class and gender in Australia, kind of combustible society. But the first kernel of an idea came in about, I guess, 2002 or 2003, whenever it was that the really crazy Canberra bushfires were happening. And I was with my friends, I think we were playing football or basketball, and there was just this black ash drifting from the sky, and it looked like kind of black snow or something like that. And I knew that I would use that image, and then also just the raging bushfire, the kind of black sky and that lipstick red sun. I knew that at some point that would become part of a poem or a script or something. And so I just kept that boiling away in the back of my head. And then after I finished a hip hop album in 2011 or 2012, I needed some time away from that crazy gigging life, and so I just started writing prose. And that idea suddenly came back to me, and that's how I started writing the novel.
So it's about being observant, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I try to just take everything in, soak everything in like a sponge, sit on the train or the tram and just listen to people's conversations. That kind of kicks off a lot of my ideas. Sometimes just see a nice, fresh, original image. A line might pop up out of the newspaper or a Facebook status update. Yeah, just observe everything very keenly around me, take it in, and then let it somehow come out in a trance-like state through my words. I see myself as inheriting kind of my ancestors' voices, older ancient storytellers in Malaysia, in the land that we live on is a land of storytelling and song, and then perhaps one day someone might inherit my voice as well. I might be somebody's poetic ancestor,
That's cool. I'm just thinking that listening to you speak, you actually speak in a quite poetic, prosy kind of way. Does that come naturally to you? You've always been like that?
I'm not sure. Maybe. My dad's got a very rich voice, and I come from an artistic family. My dad was a poet in Malaysia. My mum was in the theatre, so I've just always been around it. I was very privileged in that way, I would say. I didn't grow up with much money or any of those cool gadgets and stuff like that, but my mum, because she was, by that point, an arts journalist, was able to take me to a different gallery every night, a different theatre show, a different concert. And so, again, I was just soaking it in. And people used to make fun of me because they said I was really serious for a kid. I would just be sitting at the theatre just watching. What are they doing on stage? I like to see what they were doing wrong as well. That was something interesting for me, like whenever a performer messed up or a play was really bad, I sort of sometimes liked that a little bit more because it exposed the bones of the performance and the bones of the play and the structure, and you could learn more from that. And I think you learn more from the mistakes of others and also your own personal mistakes as a writer than probably the good things you do and all the praise and accolades and everything. You learn more from the screw-ups.
I think that's a really interesting point that you made about having some kind of privilege because you didn't have a lot of gadgetry when you were a kid. Do you think that having too many gadgets and toys in 2015 is actually taking creativity away from people?
I think sometimes because it puts people's imaginations in a straitjacket. When I was growing up in the flats, my friends and I would just be sitting around talking bullshit and telling stories for hours and hours on end. And either, because we had a bit of space in Queanbeyan, either I'd be out running around creating games with my friends, or because I was an only child, I spent a lot of time by myself, just in my room. And my parents just told me from a young age, maybe it was a cop-out on their behalf, but they just said, look, you'll never be bored if you have a piece of paper and a pen. You could draw something, you could write something. And that served me pretty well through my life. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need computers. I wasn't really that much into telly. I just had the page and the pen and my imagination and my voice.
Wish I could tell my nieces that. Just take this piece of paper and a pen, stop harassing us.
My son is completely disinterested in the TV still, but
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just a random thing like that I was just born that way. I just didn't really care.
Yeah. Well, following on nicely from that question, with the rise of sort of corporate and PR speak, do you think we're partly in a battle to rejuvenate the sincerity and the meaning of our language and communication?
That's a really good question, I think. I mean, especially growing up in Canberra, you hear all this absolutely pretentious, garbled public service speech that actually obfuscates everything and saps the meaning away from words. Sometimes you don't know what the hell someone is even saying. They can talk to you for 3 hours and they still can't tell you what they do every day. They're pushing bullshit around the room like dung beetles, you know. And so I think that, I think there needs to be a push to kind of sharpen and essentialise language and sculpt it and try and convey important, complex messages with sharp, declarative speech. But that might just be my own personal stylistic decision, because I've always been into writers who do that, like Roberto Bolaño or Ernest Hemingway, people like that, who let the emotions and the vivid imagery shine through the simple language, or seemingly simple language. But I think in public spaces as well in Australia, you know, you hear politicians and they're talking and they're just managing to hide the truth with all this kind of speech, and even online as well with lol speak and everything like that. I think people don't take as much care with language as they should. Maybe it's just not valued.
And it kind of narrows the perception of the world in a way.
Yeah.
Like, I get frustrated. A lot of my friends are involved in various activist groups, and even that world is sort of being captured a little bit by that same sort of language. I mean, partly because it works,
Definitely.
it's effective, but it's sort of
Well, I think
narrowing things as
I
well.
agree with that.
Term.
Actually, that's another form of language that's weirdly prescriptive, is PC language that leaves no room oftentimes to kind of discuss complex issues, and it's very rigid in its rules. So I think we're fighting against a lot of things.
Yeah.
But as poets, we can play pretty hard and fast with it all, I think.
Yeah.
But no one listens to us. So hopefully we're changing that.
One other question I had to ask is, if Federico Lorca and Robbie Burns and Pablo Neruda, these people, if they were alive today, would they be dabbling in hip-hop?
I think that's the question that people always ask, isn't it, with Shakespeare as well. And the teacher the other day asked me about Chaucer. Well, I think so. I mean, because I always see these type of people who manage to convey emotion in such a strong way and tap into that ancient spirit of poetry and storytelling. They are all just different branches of the same tree. They're trying to get to some essential truth about humanity. Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? Where do we come from? So I think that because hip-hop artists maybe are some of the most vibrant storytellers and poets of this generation, then perhaps they, Lorca would have been dabbling in it a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, God, I love his poetry. Woodcutter, cut my shadow from me. That's one of the greatest lines in the history of poetry, I think.
You can hear it in a song too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there have been people dabbling with it, taking his lyrics, taking, you know, some of the stuff from his plays and putting it in song lyrics.
Yeah.
Omar, can you tell me about the ring that you're wearing? Is there a story behind it?
Not really. I was in a vintage shop with a friend of mine, and she was taking a long time finding a dress, and I just looked down and saw that they had made a bunch of spoons into rings, but then the first one that caught my eye was this one, and it's Cootamundra, New South Wales, which is where my grandpa was from, so it was just kind of a weird coincidence. It's kind of like a 1.5 finger ring, you know, in hip hop we often have 4 finger rings or 2 finger rings, 1.5 finger ring.
This is a cheeky question because I'm trying to write an essay at the moment. This might help me with it.
Right.
We live in a world where most media is written kind of by and for an urban elite. and I know that you speak differently. Why is it important to speak the languages and voices of what we like to call the suburbs in Australia?
Well, to me, it's, in a way, it replicates the battle against the cultural cringe, because we, as Australians, often look back to London or New York and we feel that we need to be validated by them, that we don't have enough substance or creative vitality. And oftentimes in Australia we think the same thing, that something is not of value unless it's been validated by Melbourne or Sydney. And we have this kind of certain mythology about Australia, that there are, within Australia, that there are certain places that are of more importance than others. This kind of coastal idyll, the dead heart, the bush, maybe a little bit. But then these stories from inner city, Melbourne and Sydney. And I want to raise the stories of the flat blocks and people running around doing graffiti, petty criminals, migrants who are demonised and told to go back to where they come from in these seemingly boring suburbs. I want to raise that to the level of myth and say that these stories are full of grandeur and dignity and resilience, and they are just as important as the stories that come from elsewhere in Australia. That's really important to me, because, to paraphrase Werner Herzog, he's one of my heroes, the great film director. He said that part of art is extending sympathy where it has not been extended before, and finding stories where they have not been looked for before. And I'm hell-bent on doing that.
Yeah. That's also where most people live, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. It's the Australia that I know and that a lot of people know. Somewhere like Queanbeyan, where I grew up, surrounded by islanders, Macedonian immigrants, Greeks, Italians, Aboriginal people. Sometimes that world is not spoken to in Australian letters, and I think it should be. It has to be.
You mentioned mythology there. Do you think that a lot of the popularised notions of the Australian character or identity, this fair go and egalitarianism and being, sticking it up to authority, do you think a lot of that's diluted and myth?
Well, I think that idea of egalitarianism maybe is, we like to think of ourselves in that way, and probably we get it better here than in other parts of the world, but then you only have to look at the impoverishment of Aboriginal communities and everything to see that that's patently bullshit, and that not everyone gets a fair go in this country. You see the rise of Islamophobia. The fair go is only extended to a few select people oftentimes. But maybe sticking up to authority, I think that probably is part of the Australian character. But then maybe not as well, when we see the type of the quality of politicians that we have, and the way people have sleepwalked into having a really conservative government that's screwing the whole place up. Yeah, it's a hard one. I talk about myth, but at the same time I don't want to simplify things too much. We have to have complexity and nuance in our literature and show how messy it is, and that's what I was trying to do. Here Come the Dogs. There were certain scenes there where you don't know whose side you're on, and that, I guess, to talk about intersectionality in some way, where everything is so messy, where gender, class and race come together, that it's difficult to take sides, but we want to take sides and be reductive and stereotype people, but you can't, because everything's such a shifting cultural battleground.